Everyone, and welcome back to Always Watching. For those of you new to this channel, this is a movie review, TV review channel, and we also specialize in foreign films. So if any of that interests you, feel free to browse through my filmography. And if you like anything you hear, like, comment, and subscribe down below. But for today, we are focusing on the HBO Max series, The Last of Us. So briefly, The Last of Us is based on the popular video game which follows Joel and Ellie, a pair connected through the harshness of the sick world they live in and are forced to endure brutal circumstances and ruthless killers on a trek across post-pandemic America. So the episode is divided into two parts, before the world ends and after the world ends. The first half of the episode was flawless. We'll get to problems with the second half, but the first half was like chef's kiss. And so the episode starts off in 1968 with an interview with two opposing scientists. And the topic is, of course, pandemics. Up until now, human beings have been able to overcome any pandemic because there's usually a vaccine, or there's always some cure that comes around. But what happens if something comes around that we can't cure? And so in what had to be the scariest depiction of disease I have ever heard, the scientist starts describing the differences between fungi and viruses, and he starts to describe the circumstances in which how something that humans were previously immune to, we can suddenly become very vulnerable to. And his explanation was so realistic and it was so thought-provoking that it set the tone, right? It's enough that I believe that something like this could happen that I'm already terrified, right? And so that's how the episode starts, and then we fast forward to 2003. And I appreciated this emphasis on time throughout the whole episode, but especially the first half, because my God, what a difference a day makes, right? They start off their day just ordinary people, and then they end their day, and it's like the end of the world. And I think we can all fully relate to that. We are introduced to Joel, his brother Tommy, and his daughter Sara. And my first impressions of them is that they're just like ordinary Americans. I was reading a review discussing Pedro Pascal's casting, and they were saying that it was normally a role like this would go to a white actor. But due to how much America has changed in terms of like the look of it, it's really interesting because America may look different, but it's still the same. Right? They don't know where Jakarta is. Like, shout out to Joel and his brother Tommy, right? Like, the only thing they're concerned about is their world around them and nothing else, right? And so the episode begins on Joel's 36th birthday, and what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life turns out to be the most devastating day of his life. I mean, my God. And so Joel, for me, is a very interesting character, and I felt that by the end of the episode, I knew him very well, right? They don't really spoon-feed us his background at all, but we get hints into what kind of person he is, right? He's not really a caricature. Like, he has this tough exterior, but deep down, he's obviously a very sentimental and loving person. He keeps all these things lying around, like a broken watch. We see a pocket knife. Obviously, there's a story behind all of these things. And so that's probably why he keeps them, right? So again, he's a very, very sentimental person with this tough exterior. And he played it very well. And so I really appreciated how much time they spent on Joel and Sara, because even after Sara dies, you still feel her presence throughout, and you will feel it throughout the series, right? Like, I felt the impact in that he will never get over this. Like, this is not something, he will wake up to this nightmare like it happened yesterday. And what makes the first half of this episode terrifying is because they don't know what's coming, right? Like, imagine you're living your life, COVID, and like things just start changing. And I remember during the pandemic, even the escalation is quite realistic, right? First it's like, oh, it's just a small flu. Then it's like, oh, okay, like, I guess we need to close down schools for a while. And then full-blown lockdowns, right? Just that kind of, I remember I was at a concert and the lead singer was like, shout out to everyone for coming. It's just a flu, nothing to be scared of. And I think shortly afterwards, they started closing some schools down. And I was just thinking like, damn, is it really that serious? And just in a short time, right, like the whole world shut down. So again, it kind of mirrors that in this episode, how like the things build up and no one could imagine like damn, like that. You know, hindsight really is 2020. And so I think the episode is greatly helped by the fact that it takes place pre-Twitter era, because no one really knows what's going on outside of their communities, right? They don't see the pictures, they don't see the tweets. It's totally different experience if people are like live sharing everything and streaming and doing all that stuff. But during this time, like the only news you had was the local news. And even then it wouldn't stop you from living your day. First thing I really appreciated is the fact that we're watching Sara go throughout her day. Like we don't really follow Joel, we follow Sara. And so as Sara is going through her day, it kind of mirrors like this 24 hours, right? And so it starts off small. There's coughing, there's muscle spasms, which if you're not familiar with the game, I think would have been totally lost on you. And then slowly you're getting more and more news reports. So it starts off with international news, and then you start hearing local news reports of people, like all these random acts of violence and people thinking it's due to drugs. And then you see military planes flying overhead, right? And it's just like, whoa, what is really going on here? And so I think one of the best scenes that depicted that is when Sara is trying to get her dad's watch fixed for his birthday. And so she goes into the store, she's negotiating. The shopkeeper decides on a price, he's fixing it, and then this girl comes out in a panic, right? She's like, you need to get out of here, you need to go home, stay safe. And she's boarding up the windows like that's gonna help. And then meanwhile, you see the cars zooming past, and suddenly what was international becomes local, right? Who knew something in Jakarta would travel down here that quickly? But again, there's really nothing for Sara to think about. And I was thinking about my reaction to it too. Like I wouldn't think anything of it either. I'd be like, well, I hope they figure it out, right? So Sara takes the watch. Thankfully, he was able to fix it. And she goes about her day. Just in that short time, from her going from the store to her neighbor's house, right? You start to see like planes flying overhead. So just in a short time, things are getting worse and worse. And the scene of her at her neighbor's house, right? She's there, she's checking in on them. And then she sees this old lady sitting in a chair. And she's looking at this old lady like something ain't quite right. And it's implied that this old lady may have been infected at a hospital or whatever, but these symptoms were kicking in, right? Like this fungi, this disease, it was really kicking in, right? And so Sara still doesn't really, there's something in the air. But again, like worst case scenario, like you don't think the world is gonna end. And so just before all, hell breaks loose, Sara and her dad have like their little birthday gathering. And I really like this because even though Joel is not on screen, it's like he's there with her, like because she's thinking about him, you're like thinking about him too. And I thought that was really interesting because he's actually not on screen that much the first half of the episode. And so she kind of takes a DVD, she gives her dad the watch. And again, there's still news reports flying around that something's not quite right, but it doesn't really affect Joel, right? He comes home like he's unbothered. That's the other thing, like clearly he must have heard something was going on, but it doesn't really stop him from living his life. So this was a very cute scene because first she kind of scolds him for coming home late, and it's just the two of them, right? Their bond is very strong, and you don't know where the mother is. It's in the back of my mind, like what happened to the mom, but whatever the case, I really enjoy the time they spend together, right? Like they're like best friends, they tell each other everything, and it's the last moments of happiness that he's gonna have. So the first sign of distress comes when Tommy calls Joel and says, hey, you need to bail me out of jail because I got into this random fight. And of course, Joel is like, oh my God, like you got into a fight on my birthday. Like he has no idea what's going on out there. Poor Tommy was probably being attacked by these zombies, but had no idea he had no idea what was coming his way. And so Joel puts Sara to bed and he goes and finds Tommy. And I really appreciated the fact that we didn't follow Joel, that we stick with Sara. He puts her to bed, and then from 11 to 2 a.m., like things start to change dramatically. And so she's asleep, and then she gets woken up by these loud these public service announcements telling people to stay indoors. This dog outside looks absolutely terrified, and she doesn't know what's going on. She's just like, what is happening out here? And her reaction was so believable. You know, I like the build up to it, right? She doesn't assume the worst right away, because honestly, why would she? So she's kind of freaked out. She sees the dog. She goes and checks in on her neighbors. And it's not until she sees not just her neighbor, you know, at first she thinks maybe like someone broke in, you know, maybe these acts of violence, like people are wild and like it's hard to know what to think. And then when she sees this old lady just going in on her neighbor, then the gravity of the situation, you know, hits her. And I appreciated that buildup, because even if you're not familiar with the game, you're like, what is around the corner here? Like, and again, it was a very, very nice buildup, because you don't know what's waiting for you on the other side. And so thankfully for Sara, her father and Tommy come back in the nick of time. God knows what they've been through. Somehow he manages to get him out of jail. I'm sure that scene was dramatic. Like, he probably had to break him out. We don't know what happened, but whatever happened, it was horrifying. And again, I like how like they shot these scenes, because even when Joel hits the old lady, he's not sure, right? They're not sure. They're like, do I hit her? Like, is this okay? Even as they're driving off, they're getting scolded by the other neighbors. Like, what are you thinking? Like, people don't really know what to do, right? They just think maybe they're sick, but you don't want to commit murder either. So again, they're even just like defending themselves. They're super like hesitant. And I appreciated that a lot. And so the city is being blocked. No one can trust anyone. And, you know, at first I'm thinking, like, are these people looting or are they running for their lives, right? Like, what is happening here? You know, like, you don't even know how bad the situation is. And people's reactions to me is way more scary than the pandemic itself, right? Because Joel and Tommy, they drive past this family, and who knows what happened to that family? You know, maybe they were shot by military. So it's just kind of like, as soon as something terrible happens, it's like every man for himself. And that is far more terrifying than a disease. Kind of like pick your poison and, you know, bless up, essentially. And so it's scary because they're blocking all the roads, and you don't really know why they're blocking the roads. Are they blocking the roads to contain the pandemic? Or, you know, like, how do they plan on containing this pandemic? Or just kill it altogether? Right? So it's a bit scary. And so at one point, Sara says, like, oh, the army is here. Like, isn't it a good thing that the army is here? And talk about famous last words, right? Like, it was not a good thing. They were not there to help anyone. And this attitude of the police, like, that continues 20 years later, right? They are not to be trusted. They are against the people. Like, they were not there to contain anything. And it wasn't until the end of that episode that I realized, like, damn, like, they were just... And that's the thing, the army probably didn't know how bad the situation was, right? They're thinking, let's just quarantine these places that have signs and kill it off, right? In hopes of saving the masses. But this virus, this disease, this fungi, it's already spread. So Joel and Tommy, they're trying to brainstorm ways out of here. They're thinking, okay, like, maybe if we can get to Mexico, maybe if we can get to this place or that place. And, you know, they can't even get out of the city. Right? It's like they can barely get out. And even if they do get to Mexico, it's probably 10 times worse than it is where they are now. And the whole time this is happening, like just before they get separated, right? Tommy can't even like run these people over, right? He's kind of like, there's people everywhere. You can't really tell who's a civilian, who's a zombie, or who's diseased, who's not. And that scene of them trying to drive and then the plane crashes is like epic. It was so well done. Like, I'm telling you this, the build-up was like incredibly fantastic. And then it becomes every man for himself, right? They get separated and they have to fend for themselves on foot. And it's not until Joel sees this zombie thing that he's like, oh my God, like, what is this? And I like Joel and Sarah's relationship even towards the end, right? Because he's like, just focus on me and like, don't worry about none of this. Like, that was so sad, y'all. Someone who's never watched, is not familiar with the game at all, I had no idea where this was going, right? Because you're like, it did hit me midway through when he was like asking permission, when he was like, you know, asking permission for what? You know, what are you asking? And Joel was terrified, right? He didn't know what to do. He was paralyzed. He was frozen. He kind of saw, you could tell he kind of knew that like what this soldier was contemplating. And the fact that the soldier was sorry suggests that he had already killed like God knows how many people, which again is far scarier than any pandemic. And Joel's reaction to losing his daughter was like, you feel it in the second half of the episode, and this is what's going to be motivating him moving forward, right? So he goes from this kind of man who had a tough exterior but like a soft inside to just tough inside, tough outside, right? Like the thing that made him soft, his light is gone, right? His light is literally like shut off. And yeah, as someone who, you know, they spend so much time building this relationship that I thought, there's no way I didn't see it coming, to be honest. Like, again, I went into the show with absolutely no research. So as a viewer, it was like, whew. We fast forward 20 years later, and the second half of the episode is not as well done as the first half. I think they should have split up the episode into two. Like the first half, you know, just get us before the pandemic, and then maybe just start off 20 years later in the second episode. Like the second half was way too jam-packed. And it was trying to get us to the adventure to the point where like I was unable to really connect with anyone besides Joel. And so we meet Joel 20 years later, and it feels like, you know, the trauma happened yesterday, right? He's been totally hardened, and he has this contempt for law enforcement, right, that you kind of see throughout the episode. And I felt like when I was watching him, he was looking for a reason to live, right? So it seems like the only person he has a connection with is Tommy. And other than that, it just seems like he's someone constantly contemplating, like, why am I here? Like, what am I doing here? And he has this sort of darkness inside him. And I think the way in which his daughter died, he's still angry about it and he wants revenge. But he doesn't know how to get that revenge. Like, you sense that quiet anger in him, which is why he probably hasn't been able to just kill himself, to be honest, even though he clearly wants to. And so I think that's what the show will focus on. You know, this kind of like, how does he get out of this dark place? So the first thing to note about the second half of this episode is Boston. So it seems like America has these quarantine cities. And it's 20 years later, and they haven't really gotten any closer to finding a cure, but they have found numerous ways to keep people imprisoned against their will. And so in order to enter these quarantine cities, you have to be tested. And if you test positive, you're killed right away, which is what happens to this little boy. So it's pretty ruthless, right? And it's implied that anything outside of these quarantine cities is like, you don't go. It's post-pandemic America. There are slavers, there are raiders. There are all kinds of things going on. And what I found scary is that there's really no order, right? So as the police kind of keep power by publicly executing people, scaring people into obedience, the people themselves are either strung out, super dangerous. Like, to be honest, I'd rather die of the disease than die being murdered in some way. Like, it seemed like every man was for himself. There's no real, you know, just it just felt very unsafe throughout. Like, that's the part that tripped me out. I'm just like, this is really dangerous. Like, I'll just take my chances with the disease because, like, there's a lot of weird things going on right here. So we are reintroduced to Joel. It seems like he's now just totally hardened by his experience. He kind of takes odd jobs. He's surviving also by being a drug smuggler to the police. Like, he has this side hustle. And he seems really angry. Like, he has a reputation for strong-arming people. He kind of looks like he's ready for a fight at any moment, right? Like, that's just the energy that he's giving. And so he's just kind of done. Like, he's going through the motions, and that's pretty much it. And so the drama starts. So this episode has to do two things. First, it has to bridge two storylines. One is with these Fireflies, and the other is with Joel and his partner, Tess. And they have to bridge these storylines so they can get us to the adventure part. So we're introduced to Joel and Tess. So Tess is his partner. And we're introduced to her getting beat up by these men that she employed to get her a battery. So it seems like Joel is increasingly concerned about his brother. And so his brother is really important because that's kind of how they link these two storylines. So it seems like Joel's brother Tommy has left to join the Fireflies. Like, this is what I understood. and it's been some time since he's reported back. So Joel is kind of worried about his brother. He's wondering if he's okay, and he wants to get out there and find him in case he is in trouble. And the first half of the episode did a good job of convincing me of their bond, that I am invested in Joel finding his brother, because his brother is kind of the only thing keeping him alive, right? He's like, I can't lose you too, brother, right? And then on the flip side, you have these Fireflies who aren't really much of a I don't know, they weren't really convincing me all that much, but they've kind of kidnapped this little girl. My first impressions of her were that she was annoying, right? And the build-up, it's really a shame because the second half of the episode is so rushed. One of the things that you're kind of told erratically at the end is why she's there, right? First, I thought she was maybe somebody's rich daughter. I don't know, like she had connections. She was like, I have connections to that raggedy police force. You better let me out. You know, you don't know what you're going to be in for. So she was making, she basically made it clear she has connections and she wasn't afraid to use them. And so they keep teasing us with like why she's there, right? Like why she's important. And so that could have been a really epic reveal, right? Because you don't know why she's there. You're like, why is she here? You know, and slowly, like, some characters start to learn why she's there and their face totally changes. So I thought the way they did it could have been really good if they didn't rush it at the end. From what I understood, she was basically an orphan. And it's really interesting because she didn't see she wasn't here before the pandemic, right? So for her, the outside world doesn't exist. She only knows what's inside the confines of this place. And that's really important to know, right? Because for her, like, this is the real world, right? It doesn't get any better than this. So the way they kind of intersect was quite rushed. So Joel and Tess decide they need to get revenge and they need to get their battery back. And they break into this abandoned building, but they don't know that the Fireflies are there. So as they're going through this abandoned building, you know, there's a few things that threw me off. First, they see this dead body on the wall, and they're just like, whoa, that's crazy. Now, I think the show kind of sacrificed, because the thing with this deadly disease, right, like, I don't see how you could be in proximity to that thing and not get sick. Like, that just defies logic. And even attention to detail, like with this show, when they're throwing out the bodies, like, why aren't you wearing gloves? In these 20 years, have there been any vaccinations or anything to suggest that you could be in proximity to this thing and not get sick? So scenes that threw me off that I'm like, And I kind of understand the logic. Like, they don't want their actors to wear masks. And so they kind of focus on the human story of it. But yeah, that scene threw me off because I felt sick from the scream. Like, so I'm just like, there ain't no way y'all didn't get sick from that. So they enter this abandoned building and they see a bunch of dead soldiers. And we don't see the shootout, but something clearly happened. And the Fireflies are desperate. They're like, Joel, I need you to take this little girl. And I need you to take her to the revolutionaries. And in exchange, we'll give you whatever you need so you can, you can sort yourself out and find your brother. This little girl, they need to keep her safe, but she's kind of over it. And so when they're kind of negotiating, a few things came to mind. So Joel doesn't even like the Fireflies. So I think what happened with his daughter totally turned him off to the idea of law enforcement or revolutionaries. Like, he's not following anyone, period. And the only reason he agrees to this is in hopes of saving his brother. So they agreed to take the girl and they agreed to get out. So we get to the end of this episode, and the end of the episode was quite chaotic. And I don't think it was very well done. I think they should have just split this into 2 episodes because they kind of reveal a lot right away. So they're getting out of the city and then they're stopped by this raggedy cop. And they're like, listen, we'll give you whatever you want and this and that. So this scene was important for 2 reasons. First, Joel kind of like, the anger comes out, right? He's not afraid of the police. He tackles him to save this little girl that reminds him of his daughter. So this anger that Joel has in him, this need for revenge, like, it's coming out, right? So that's what I got out of it when he tackled that police officer. And second, I guess this little girl is like the cure for humanity. Like, she has the disease, but she's not dead yet. And they don't really know why that is. So it's imperative they need to figure that out. Now, that reveal, I didn't see it. It was so rushed, and it's such a massive reveal that I was just like, wait, what happened? Like, I had to watch the episode twice, and I was like, wait, what? So I don't know. I feel like for new viewers, that was a bit annoying because it's such a big moment. So yeah, the second half of the episode was quite rushed. You know, there were moments, you know, when Ellie was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in the outside world. Again, she's a kid. She's never seen like anything besides post-pandemic America. And so the episode was rushed, but we get to the storyline. So overall, I am invested. I think they spent enough time building Joel's character and his relationship to Tommy and to his daughter that I am interested to see where Joel goes. Now, these other characters I'm not that attached to yet. Maybe I will be in the second half. And yeah, it was just, the second half was quite chaotic. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.